The bullet tore through Megan Holloway's shoulder with a wet crack, spinning her sideways as crimson bloomed across her white apron. Her body hit the checkered floor of Rosewood Cafe, coffee cups shattering around her, a 4-year-old girl screaming beneath the booth where Megan had just shoved her to safety. The gunman stumbled backward, startled by what he'd done. And in the corner booth, a man in a $12,000 suit slowly rose to his feet. What the gunman didn't know, Victor Ashford hadn't felt anything in 5 years. Not since he ignored his daughter's final phone call. What Megan didn't know, the man watching her bleed had the power to change her life forever. What neither of them knew, their lives had been connected long before this moment. In exactly 72 hours, one of them would be on national television. But first, let me show you how a waitress became a billionaire's redemption. Before I reveal what Victor did next, I need to know something. If you saw a stranger's child in danger, a gun pointed at a 4-year-old, would you freeze or would you move? Be honest. There's no judgment here, but your answer says everything about who you are. Drop it in the comments below and hit subscribe right now, because what Victor Ashford did in the next 60 seconds would cost him $47 million and save his soul. Also, drop your city so I know where my people are watching from. The smell hit you before anything else at Rosewood Cafe. Fresh peach cobbler bubbling in the oven. Brown sugar caramelizing into something close to heaven. That scent had wrapped itself around Megan Holloway for 18 months now, settling into her hair, her clothes, the creases of her hands. Some days, she thought it was the only sweet thing left in her life. Savannah in late September still clung to summer's humidity like a stubborn child. The brass ceiling fans churned lazy circles overhead, pushing warm air around the cafe without really cooling anything. Afternoon light spilled through lace curtains, casting patterns on the checkered floor that Megan had mopped at 5 a.m. before the first customer wandered in looking for coffee and conversation. She moved through the lunch rush like water through river stones, smooth, efficient, invisible. 23 orders in her head right now. Table for wanted their eggs over medium out over easy. And Lord help anyone who confused Mrs. Patterson's decaf for regular. Table 9's check came to $47.83, which meant a 20% tip would be $9.57. But they'd round down to 9 even. They always did. Her fingers brushed the medical alert bracelet on her left wrist, a habit she didn't even notice anymore. Sterling silver, tarnished at the edges, engraved with a name that wasn't hers. She'd worn it every day for 3 years. A reminder, a promise, a weight she couldn't put down. Order up, Meg. Carlos called from the kitchen window, sliding 2 plates of shrimp and grits onto the warming ledge. She grabbed them without breaking stride, balancing both on her left arm, while refilling sweet tea with her right. Muscle memory. Her body knew this job even when her mind wandered somewhere darker. $412.67. That's what sat in her checking account as of this morning. She checked it twice, hoping the numbers might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. Her mother's insulin was due in 6 days. $847 for a 1-month supply. The math didn't work. The math never worked. Megan positioned herself near the front door between orders. Another habit. This one from her old life. Trauma nurses learned to stay close to exits. You never knew when something was coming through that door, and the ones who survived were the ones who saw it first. She didn't know why she still did it. Rosewood Cafe wasn't Savannah Memorial's emergency room. The most dangerous thing that came through that door was usually Mrs. Henderson complaining about her biscuits being too dry. But some instincts don't die just because you lose your license. Some instincts just wait. The bell above the door chimed. Megan's eyes flicked up automatically, her body already cataloging. Male mid-50s, expensive suit alone, and something else. Something in his posture that made her hands pause on the coffee pot. She'd seen that look before. In hospital hallways, in waiting rooms, At 3 a.m. Grief. The man walked into Rosewood Café like he owned it, which for all Megan knew he probably could. His suit alone cost more than 3 months of her rent. Charcoal gray, Italian cut, the kind of fabric that whispered money so quietly you had to lean in to hear it. But he came alone. No assistant. No entourage. No phone pressed to his ear barking orders at someone who made 6 figures to absorb his bad moods. Dolores, the 63-year-old waitress who'd worked the counter since Reagan was president, nearly dropped her coffee pot. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, grabbing Megan's elbow. "That's Victor Ashford, the Ashford Maritime guy. His face was on the cover of Forbes last month." Megan watched him choose a corner booth, back to the wall, sightlines to both exits. Military, she thought, or just paranoid. Sometimes the two looked exactly the same. "He tips 200%, Dolores continued, voice hushed with something between awe and fear. "But don't expect conversation. Man hasn't smiled since," she stopped herself. "Well, just don't expect conversation." He settled into the booth without looking at the menu. Megan grabbed her notepad and crossed the room, her worn sneakers silent on the floor. Up close, the cracks in his armor became visible. The suit was immaculate, but his eyes were somewhere else entirely. Like someone had scooped out whatever used to live behind them and left only the shell. "What can I get you, sir?" He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed across the room, and Megan followed it to booth 7, where a young mother was trying to convince a 4-year-old girl to eat her mac and cheese. The child had blonde pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, and she was making her chicken nuggets dance across the table like puppets. Victor Ashford stared at that little girl like she was a ghost. "Coffee," he said finally. "Black. And whatever your lunch special is." "That's the shrimp and grits today. Best in Savannah, some say." Nothing. No response. No acknowledgement that she'd spoken at all. Megan had dealt with rude customers before. Billionaires who looked through waitresses like they were furniture. But this wasn't rudeness. This was something else. His hands, she noticed, were pressed flat against the table, steadying themselves. And his jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. She brought his coffee. He didn't touch it. She brought his shrimp and grits. He pushed it around the plate with his fork, never taking a single bite. For 45 minutes, Victor Ashford sat in that corner booth, drinking nothing, eating nothing, watching a stranger's child laugh over chicken nuggets. When the check came, he left $600 on a $40 tab. Cash. No eye contact. He was halfway to the door when Megan's voice stopped him. "Sir, you forgot your. Keep it." The door swung shut behind him. Through the window, Megan watched him climb into a black Mercedes and sit there for a long moment, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, before finally driving away. "What's his story?" Megan asked Dolores. The older woman's face softened into something unbearably sad. "His daughter, Emma. She was killed in a shopping mall shooting 5 years ago. She was 23. Dolores paused. "They say she had blonde hair, pigtails when she was little." Megan looked back at booth 7, where the 4-year-old girl was now wearing mac and cheese in her hair, giggling. Grief. She'd seen it enough in the ER to recognize it anywhere. She just hadn't expected to see it wrapped in a $12,000 suit. It happened at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary afternoon that gives no warning before it shatters. Victor Ashford had returned. Same booth. Same untouched coffee. Same hollow stare fixed on the little blonde girl in booth 7. Megan had stopped trying to make conversation. Some wounds didn't want words. They just wanted witnesses. The cafe hummed with the comfortable noise of a late lunch crowd. Forks scraping plates. The hiss of the espresso machine. Dolores laughing at something Carlos said through the kitchen window. 12 customers scattered across 9 tables, plus Victor alone in the corner, invisible in plain sight. Megan was refilling Mrs. Patterson's decaf when the front door exploded inward. He was young, mid-20s maybe, though the black ski mask made it hard to tell. What wasn't hard to see was the gun, a 9mm, shaking in hands that clearly hadn't held one before. His voice cracked when he screamed, "Everybody down. Now, empty the register." Time fractured into 1,000 sharp pieces. Mrs. Patterson's coffee cup hit the floor. Dolores pressed herself against the counter, hands raised. Carlos disappeared into the kitchen, calling 911 hopefully. The other customers dropped beneath tables, some crying, some frozen, all of them suddenly understanding that ordinary afternoons lie. Megan didn't move, couldn't move. Her body had locked in place, caught between two versions of herself. The waitress who should hide, and the trauma nurse who'd spent 8 years running toward gunshots instead of away from them. The gunman swept his weapon across the room, feeding on the fear like oxygen. I said down, "Everyone on the floor now." And then the little girl in booth 7 started crying. It was the kind of cry that children make when they're scared beyond understanding. High, piercing, unstoppable. Her mother tried to muffle it, pressing the girl's face against her chest. But terror doesn't respond to shushing. The sound cut through the café like a blade. The gunman's head snapped toward booth 7. "Shut that kid up." The mother sobbed. "I'm trying, please. She's only 4, please." He strode toward them, gun raised, something unhinged breaking loose behind his eyes. Whatever plan he'd walked in with was dissolving. Desperation was taking over. Desperation and rage and the horrible momentum of a man who'd already crossed a line and couldn't find his way back. I said, "Shut her up." The gun pointed at the child. 3 seconds. Megan had 3 seconds to make a choice. She thought about her mother, alone in the apartment with her insulin running out. She thought about the $412.67 that wouldn't cover a funeral. She thought about the medical alert bracelet on her wrist, the name engraved there, the promise she'd made, the person she used to be before they took everything from her. She thought, "I can't watch a child die." Her body moved before her mind gave permission. 18 months of carrying plates had kept her fast. 8 years in the ER had taught her angles, trajectories, the geometry of crisis. She calculated the distance, 12 feet, maybe 13, and she ran. "Hey!" The gunman spun toward her voice, the barrel swinging away from the child for one critical second. Megan Dove, her shoulder connecting with the little girl's mother, shoving them both deeper into the booth, her body becoming a wall between the weapon and the child. The gun went off. The sound was impossibly loud, a crack that split the world in half. Megan felt the impact before the pain, a sledgehammer blow to her left shoulder that spun her sideways and dropped her to the floor. Warm wetness spread across her chest. The checker tiles pressed cold against her cheek. The café went silent. Even the little girl stopped crying. Through the ringing in her ears, Megan heard the gunman stumbling backward. Heard him saying, "Oh God, like a prayer he didn't believe in." She tried to lift her head, tried to see if the child was safe, but her body had stopped taking orders. The ceiling fan spun lazy circles above her. The smell of gunpowder mixed with peach cobbler into something that would haunt her forever. And then movement from the corner booth. Victor Ashford rose slowly to his feet. His face was unreadable, carved from stone, empty of everything except a terrible focus calm. He stepped over the broken coffee cups and the scattered menus, moving toward the gunman with the unhurried precision of a man who had stopped being afraid of death a long time ago. The shooter raised the gun toward him. "Stay back. Stay back." Victor didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't speak. Megan's vision was blurring at the edges now, darkness creeping in from the periphery. But she saw what happened next. She saw Victor's hand close around the gunman's wrist. She saw the weapon drop to the floor. She saw the man who hadn't smiled in 5 years standing over the man who just shot a stranger. And she saw his lips move, words she couldn't hear, words that made the shooter crumble to his knees. Then Victor Ashford turned and walked toward her, kneeling in the pool of her blood, pressing both hands against her shoulder with pressure that screamed through every nerve ending she had left. "Stay with me," he said. First words he'd spoken to her directly. "Help is coming. Stay with me." She wanted to tell him she was a nurse, that she knew the wound was bad, that the blood loss was already too much. But her mouth wouldn't form words anymore. The last thing she saw before the darkness took her was his face, and the tears cutting tracks through the stone. Sirens. That's what pulled her back from black. The wail of approaching sirens, and a voice that wouldn't let her go. Her name is Megan. Megan Holloway. Gunshot wound to the left shoulder, significant blood loss. Pulses thready but present. She needs trauma surgery, not urgent care. Do you understand me? Trauma surgery. Now. Victor Ashford stood in the ambulance bay of Savannah Memorial Hospital, his $12,000 suit soaked in a stranger's blood, issuing orders to paramedics like he'd done it 1,000 times. And maybe he had. The way he disarmed that gunman, efficient, brutal, emotionless. That wasn't a boardroom skill. That was something else. Something military. Something trained into bone and muscle long before he learned to read profit margins. Megan faded in and out. Fluorescent lights. The cold bite of an 4 needle. Voices arguing about blood type and surgical teams. Victor's voice cutting through all of it. "I don't care what it costs. She receives the best surgeon in this hospital, or I buy this hospital and fire everyone in it. Are we clear?" Through the haze, she almost laughed. Billionaires, even saving lives, they couldn't help sounding like threats. The gurney rolled through swinging doors, and Victor's voice faded. But his face stayed with her, imprinted on the darkness behind her eyes. The tears. The stone cracking. The way he'd said her name like it mattered. "Stay with me." She tried. She really tried. The memories came in fragments, sharp and disjointed, slicing through the anesthesia fog. She was 26 again, standing in the ER at Chicago General, badge still shiny, idealism still intact. Dr. Richard Everly was barking orders. He always barked orders. And a patient was coding on the table. She saw what he'd missed, the medication error, the wrong dosage that would have killed a 63-year-old grandmother named Patricia Ashford. She'd caught it, fixed it, saved a life, and then she'd reported it. The next 6 months were a masterclass in how institutions protect their own. Dr. Everly had connections. Hospital board members who golfed with him on Sundays. Lawyers who found discrepancies in Megan's charting. Discrepancies that hadn't existed until someone needed them to. Her license review became an inquisition. Her colleagues became strangers. Her career became a casualty of the unforgivable sin of being right. License suspended, pending investigation. Investigation that never quite concluded. Never quite cleared her, just lingered, like a wound that wouldn't heal because someone kept reopening it. She'd moved to Savannah because it was far enough from Chicago to feel like running away, and close enough to her mother to feel like coming home. She'd taken the job at Rosewood Café because it didn't require a nursing license, didn't require explaining why she'd thrown away 8 years of training to carry plates. And she'd kept Patricia Ashford's medical alert bracelet because the woman had pressed it into her hand on discharge day and said, "You saved my life, sweetheart. Don't let anyone make you forget what you're worth." She hadn't known Patricia's last name then. Hadn't known she was connected to anyone powerful. Hadn't known that one act of integrity would cost her everything. The bracelet had been her anchor ever since. Proof that she'd been something once. Proof that she'd mattered. She woke to white walls and beeping machines and the particular silence of a private hospital room that cost more per night than her monthly rent. A figure sat in the chair by the window. Victor Ashford, still wearing the bloodstained suit, still watching her with those hollow eyes, though something had shifted in them now, something that looked almost like recognition. The girl, Megan managed, her voice like gravel. The little girl, safe, unharmed. Her mother wants to thank you, but I told her you needed rest. The shooter, in custody. He'll face charges: attempted armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder. Victor paused. He's 19. Lost his job last month. His mother needs dialysis he can't afford. Megan closed her eyes. Even the monsters had stories. Your surgery was successful, Victor continued. No permanent nerve damage. You'll need physical therapy, but you'll recover full use of the arm. The hospital bill has been covered. All of it. I can't accept. It's not charity. His voice hardened. You took a bullet for a child. A stranger's child. When everyone else said you moved. That's not something you repay with money. But money's what I have. So money's what I'm offering. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked. The grief was still there, carved into every line of his face. But something else was there too now. A crack in the armor. A question he didn't know how to ask. Why, he said finally. Why did you do it? Megan touched the bracelet on her wrist. The hospital hadn't removed it. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Victor Ashford stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, like she'd confirmed something he'd been afraid to believe. Get some rest, he said, rising from the chair. We have a lot to talk about when you're stronger. He was gone before she could ask what he meant. Megan just risked her life for a stranger. And now she's waking up in a hospital room paid for by a billionaire she's never met. But here's the question I need you to answer. Was she right to move? To risk everything for a child she didn't know? Leaving her own mother without anyone to care for her? Victor Ashford hadn't slept in 36 hours. He sat in the leather chair of his home office in the Ardsley Park mansion. 12,000 square feet of silence he bought 5 years ago because the old house held too many memories. The new house held nothing at all. That was the point. His laptop glowed in the darkness, casting blue light across the walls. On the screen, Megan Holloway's entire life, reconstructed from public records, news archives, and the kind of databases that billionaires could access with a single phone call. She wasn't just a waitress. She'd never been just a waitress. Megan Elizabeth Holloway, born in Macon, Georgia, graduated summa cum laude from Emory University's nursing program. Hired at Chicago General Hospital at 24. By 28, she was one of the top trauma nurses in the ER. Commendations from 3 department heads. A safety award for catching a near-fatal medication error. Victor clicked on the next file. His jaw tightened. The medication error she'd caught wasn't minor. A Dr. Richard Everly had prescribed the wrong dosage to a 63-year-old patient recovering from cardiac surgery. The error would have been fatal. Megan caught it, corrected it, saved the patient's life. And then she reported it. The investigation that followed was a masterclass in institutional protection. Dr. Everly had connections, board members, donors, the chief of medicine who'd mentored him for 15 years. Within 6 months, Megan's spotless record had been rewritten. Documentation discrepancies, alleged procedural violations, her nursing license suspended pending review, a review that had been ongoing for 3 years now. She'd lost everything because she refused to let a doctor kill a patient. Victor stared at the screen. His chest felt hollow, scraped out, the way it always felt when he encountered someone who'd been destroyed for doing the right thing. He knew that feeling. He'd caused it often enough in his early years, the ruthless decades when building Ashford Maritime meant crushing anyone who got in the way. He pulled the photograph from his wallet. Emma, 23 years old in this picture, taken 3 weeks before she died. Blonde hair, gap-toothed smile she'd never outgrown, eyes that looked at him like he was a hero, even when he didn't deserve it, especially when he didn't deserve it. Why did he keep staring at this photo? Because she was all he had left. Because her face was the only thing that made him feel anything anymore. Because every time he looked at her, he remembered the phone call he didn't answer. He closed the laptop. Tomorrow he would visit Rosewood Cafe, There was someone he needed to talk to. The hospital room was too quiet. Megan had spent 8 years working in places where machines beeped constantly, where codes were called over intercoms, where the sound of running footsteps meant someone was fighting for their life. This private room, with its muted monitors and its view of the hospital garden, felt like a tomb. A nurse she didn't recognize came in to check her vitals. Not a trauma nurse. Oncology, maybe. The gentle ones always came from oncology. "You're healing well," the nurse said, adjusting Megan's four. "Dr. Patel says another week and you can start physical therapy." Another week. Megan stared at the ceiling. "I can't afford another week." "Actually," the nurse hesitated, "you might want to talk to billing. There's been some kind of arrangement." "What arrangement?" The nurse handed her a folded printout. Megan opened it with her good hand, expecting the worst. $50, 000, $80,000. Numbers that would follow her to the grave. The balance read $0. Beneath it in small print, paid in full. Anonymous donor. Amount: $89,247.16. Megan's hand trembled. She read it again and again. The numbers didn't change. $89,000. Someone had paid $89,000 for a stranger's surgery. For her surgery. She thought of Victor Ashford, his blood-stained suit, his hollow eyes, the way he'd knelt in her blood and pressed his hands against her wound like he was trying to hold her soul inside her body. "It's not charity," he'd said. "You took a bullet for a child." But this felt like charity. This felt like being saved by someone who thought money could fix anything. And Megan had spent 3 years learning that money couldn't fix the things that actually mattered. Rosewood Café was closed for renovations. Bullet holes and bloodstains required more than a mop and bucket. But Dolores Jenkins was there anyway, sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring at the spot where Megan had fallen. She looked up when Victor walked in. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but steady. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. Victor sat on the stool beside her. He didn't order anything, didn't speak, just waited. Dolores was 63 years old. She'd been a waitress for 41 years, not because she lacked ambition, but because she'd raised 4 children alone after her husband died in a factory accident, and waitressing let her be home when they needed her. She understood sacrifice in ways that billionaires never would. "You want to know about Megan," she said. "It wasn't a question. I want to understand why she did it." Dolores laughed, a tired, knowing sound. "You think there's a complicated answer? There isn't. That girl sees someone hurting. She moves. Doesn't think about it. Doesn't calculate the cost. She just moves. That's not normal." "No," Dolores agreed. "It's not. Most people freeze. Most people protect themselves first. But Megan..." She shook her head. That girl gave up everything. Her career, her savings, her future. Because she wouldn't lie to protect a doctor who almost killed a patient. You know what she got for that? 3 years of hell. License suspended. Reputation destroyed. And she still tips out the bus boys from her own pocket. Because she knows they're struggling worse than she is. Victor said nothing. His hand moved to his pocket, to the photograph. Dolores noticed. "Who's in the picture?" He should have deflected, should have changed the subject. But something in this woman's eyes, the same quiet strength he'd seen in Megan's, made him answer honestly. "My daughter, Emma. She died 5 years ago." Dolores's face softened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." His voice was flat. "I'm the one who should be sorry. I wasn't there when she needed me. I was on a conference call while she bled out on a shopping mall floor." The silence stretched between them. Dolores didn't offer platitudes, didn't say it wasn't his fault. She just sat with him in the wreckage of his confession, bearing witness the way good people do. "Megan doesn't know who paid her bills," Victor said finally. "You going to tell her?" "I don't know." He looked at the bloodstain on the floor. "I don't know what I'm doing. I just know I can't walk away from this." Dolores studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Good, she said, because that girl deserves someone who won't walk away. Lord knows everyone else has. 3 days later, Victor Ashford appeared in Megan's doorway. She was sitting up now, her left arm immobilized in a sling, her hospital gown replaced with a worn t-shirt her mother had brought from home. The TV was off. The flowers from well-wishers, strangers who'd seen the news coverage, lined the windowsill like a funeral arrangement. You again, she said. Not hostile, not welcoming, just tired. Victor stepped inside. He'd changed clothes since the shooting, charcoal slacks, a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her car. But his eyes still had that hollow, haunted look, like a man who'd been running from something for so long he'd forgotten what he was running toward. How's the shoulder? Functional. Eventually. She gestured to the chair by her bed with her good arm. Sit down. You're making me nervous hovering like that. He sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The beeping monitors filled the silence. I know you paid my bills, Megan said finally. Victor's expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. Anonymous donor? $89,000? In Savannah? She almost laughed. There's only one person in that cafe who could write that check without blinking, and he's sitting in my room right now. Would it matter if I admitted it? It would matter if you told me why. Victor leaned back in the chair. His hands rested on his knees. Deliberately still, deliberately controlled. I told you, you took a bullet for a child. That's not something you repay with. With money. Yeah, you said that. Megan's voice hardened. But here's what I've learned about billionaires, Mr. Ashford. You don't give away $89,000 without wanting something. So what is it? A photo op? A story for your PR team? Billionaire saves heroic waitress. Gray headline. Really humanizes the brand. Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger. Something worse. Something that looked like shame. You think I'm here for publicity? I think you're here because you feel guilty about something. And you're using me to feel better about yourself. She held his gaze. I'm not your redemption project, Mr. Ashford. The words landed like blows. Victor's jaw tightened. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, controlled. But there was a crack in it now. A fracture she hadn't heard before. You're right. I do feel guilty. But not for the reasons you think. Then enlighten me. He stood, walked to the window, stared out at the hospital garden where patients in wheelchairs sat among the flowers, soaking in sunlight they might not see again. My daughter was 23 when she died, he said. Emma. She was in a shopping mall in Charlotte when a man with a rifle walked in and started shooting. 17 people died that day. Emma was the fourth. Megan's anger cooled. Not disappeared, but cooled. She'd heard about the Charlotte Mall shooting. Everyone had. She just hadn't connected it to the hollow-eyed man who sat in corner booths and tipped 200%. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't. She called me. Victor's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, forcing it steady. While it was happening, while she was hiding in a dressing room, bleeding from a wound she didn't know would kill her, she called me and I didn't answer. The room went very still. I was on a conference call. A merger worth $400 million. My assistant told me Emma was calling. And I said, he stopped, swallowed. I said I'd call her back. I'd call her back when the meeting was over. Victor? She left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it until after I got the call from a hospital. After they told me she'd bled out in a dressing room, alone, while I was discussing quarterly projections. He turned from the window. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady now. The terrible steadiness of someone who told this story to himself 1,000 times and still couldn't make it hurt any less. You asked why I paid your bills. It's not publicity. It's not redemption. It's because I sat in that cafe and watched you throw yourself in front of a bullet for a stranger's child. And I thought, she did what I couldn't. She didn't hesitate. His voice broke. Emma called me for help, and I didn't answer. That little girl screamed. And you moved. You moved without thinking because that's who you are. And I need to understand how someone becomes that because I've spent 5 years trying to figure out how I became the opposite. Megan stared at him. The billionaire. The man in the $12,000 suit. The grief she'd recognized in the café. It wasn't just grief. It was guilt. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that rewrites your entire life into a story of failure. You think money fixes everything, she said softly. It doesn't. I've seen enough rich people in the ER to know that. Money can buy better doctors, private rooms, experimental treatments. But it can't buy back the moments you missed. It can't make you the person you wish you'd been. I know. Then stop trying to fix me with a checkbook. I didn't take that bullet because I'm a hero. I took it because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. That's not courage, that's just math. The cost of doing nothing was higher than the cost of moving. Victor studied her for a long moment. You did the math in a fraction of a second. Most people never do it all. Most people haven't spent 8 years in a trauma ward. And now you're spending your years carrying plates because you told the truth about a doctor who almost killed someone. His voice hardened. That's not justice. That's a crime. Megan's eyes narrowed. How do you know about that? Silence. You investigated me. It wasn't a question. Yes. She should have been angry, violated. But something in his honesty, the raw, unguarded way he'd just confessed his greatest failure, made anger feel petty. What else did you find? That the doctor you reported, Richard Everly, is now on the board of this hospital. That the administrator pressuring you about your bills is his former colleague. That your license suspension wasn't justice. It was retaliation orchestrated by people who decided protecting their own was more important than protecting patients. Megan's blood ran cold. Everly is here? At Savannah Memorial. He joined the board 18 months ago. 6 months after you started working at Rosewood Café. That's not a coincidence. No, Victor agreed. It's not. He moved toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. When he turned back, his face had changed, the grief still there, but something else rising beneath it. Purpose. Resolve. I can't undo what happened to Emma. I can't be the father who answered the phone, but I can be the person who doesn't walk away from this. His eyes met hers. If you let me help you. Megan watched him go. His hands, she noticed, were trembling. The same hands that had pressed against her wound. The same hands that had disarmed a gunman. The same hands that probably hadn't stopped shaking since the day his daughter died. She looked at the medical alert bracelet on her wrist. Patricia Ashford, the patient she'd saved in Chicago. She didn't know why the name hadn't connected before. Maybe because Ashford was common enough. Maybe because she'd been too focused on surviving to remember. But now, staring at the name etched in silver, she wondered, what were the chances? The discharge papers arrived on a Thursday. Megan sat in her hospital bed, staring at the stack of documents like they were a death sentence, which, in a way, they were. Patient stable for discharge. Outpatient physical therapy recommended. Follow-up appointment in 2 weeks. Simple words. Clinical words. Words that didn't mention the $127,482 in additional medical bills that had accumulated since Victor's anonymous payment. Specialist consultations, imaging medications, the private room she hadn't asked for, but somehow ended up in anyway. The anonymous donation had covered her surgery. It hadn't covered everything else. And now she was being discharged to what? No job, no insurance, no savings, an apartment she couldn't afford, and a mother whose insulin cost $847 a month, and a body that couldn't carry plates for another 6 weeks minimum. Her phone buzzed. A text from a landlord. Rent past due. Final notice. Another buzz. Her mother. Don't worry about me, sweetheart. I'll figure something out. Megan pressed her palm against her eyes, refusing to cry. She'd cried enough. Tears didn't pay bills. Tears didn't restore nursing licenses. Tears didn't undo 3 years of professional exile, or bring back the life she'd built before one moment of integrity burned it all down. The door opened. A hospital administrator, sharp suit, sharper smile, stepped inside. "Ms. Holloway, I'm Gerald Morrison, Director of Patient Services. Do you have a moment?" She didn't, but she nodded anyway. Morrison sat in the chair Victor had occupied the day before. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I understand there's been some confusion about your billing situation. The anonymous donation covered your initial surgery, but subsequent care has generated additional charges. Charges that, I'm afraid, require resolution before we can process your discharge. I thought I was being discharged today. You are, but we'll need to establish a payment plan. Or," he paused, letting the silence sharpen, "we can discuss alternative arrangements." Megan's instincts, honed by 8 years of reading people in crisis, screamed warning. What kind of arrangements? "The hospital is prepared to forgive your debt entirely, in exchange for your signature on a statement acknowledging that your previous employment difficulties were the result of personal issues rather than institutional retaliation." The room tilted. "You want me to lie? I want to offer you a fresh start, Ms. Holloway. Your debt cleared. A reference letter for future employment. All you have to do is sign a simple document clarifying that your nursing license situation was unrelated to any actions by Dr. Everly or Chicago General Hospital." She understood now. This wasn't generosity. This was a cleanup operation. Someone had noticed that the waitress who took a bullet was the same nurse who'd almost exposed a malpractice cover-up, and they were moving to neutralize the threat before she became a story again. "Get out," she said. Morrison's smile flickered. "Ms. Holloway, get out." He stood, straightening his jacket. "The offer stands for 48 hours. After that, collections will begin. I hope you'll reconsider." He left. The door clicked shut, and Megan finally let herself cry. Not sad tears, but rage tears, the kind that burned like acid and tasted like everything she'd lost. Across town, Victor Ashford sat in a conference room, surrounded by lawyers. "The optics are problematic," his chief counsel was saying. "You were present during a violent crime. You physically subdued the perpetrator. Now you're paying the medical bills of a witness? If this goes to civil court." "It won't go to civil court. You don't know that. The shooter's family could sue. The café could sue. The woman herself could sue. And if anyone discovers your involvement, they'll claim you're trying to buy favorable testimony." "Testimony about what?" "She saved a child's life. And you have a documented history of emotional instability following your daughter's death. A opposing counsel could argue you're not acting rationally, that you've attached yourself to this woman because of some psychological." "Enough." Victor's voice was quiet, but it silenced the room. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm doing. Find a way to make it work." The lawyers exchanged glances, the kind of glances that said, "He's lost it." The grief finally broke him. Victor didn't care what they thought. He'd stopped caring about that 5 years ago. After the meeting, he drove to Bonaventure Cemetery. The gates were closing, but the groundskeeper recognized his car and waved him through. Victor Ashford had donated $2 million to the cemetery's restoration fund. Doors opened for men like him, even doors to the dead. Emma's grave was in the old section, beneath a live oak draped with Spanish moss. The headstone was simple. She'd always hated ostentation. Just her name, her dates, and a line from her favorite poem. "I carry your heart with me. I carry it in my heart." Victor knelt on the grass. The soil was damp from yesterday's rain. He didn't care about his $400 slacks. "I found someone," he said to the stone. "Someone like you would have been, I think. Someone who moves toward the fire instead of away from it. She's in trouble, Emma. The kind of trouble that money alone can't fix." He pulled a folder from his jacket. Inside, The paperwork for the Emma Ashford Foundation for Victims of Gun Violence. He'd had it drawn up 4 years ago, had never signed it, had never been able to make his hand move across the signature line, because signing it meant admitting she was really gone. "I've been a coward," he said, hiding behind my guilt like it was a shield instead of a wound. But this woman, Megan, she made me realize something. Guilt doesn't honor you. Action does. He opened the folder, found a pen in his pocket. "Tomorrow, I'm going to do what I should have done 5 years ago. I'm going to stop hiding. I'm going to fight for someone who deserves it." And maybe his voice cracked. "Maybe that's how I finally become the father you deserved." He signed his name. The ink gleamed wet in the fading light. Tomorrow everything would change. The War Council assembled in the back room of Rosewood Café. Victor had rented the entire building for the week, officially for renovations, unofficially for planning. Dolores sat at the counter, her coffee finally hot for the first time in days. Beside her, Henry Beaumont, the 74-year-old cafe owner, who'd hired Megan 18 months ago without asking why a woman with an Emory nursing degree wanted to carry plates. And in the corner, a new face, Keisha Williams, attorney-at-law, Megan's former college roommate, and the only person who'd believed her when Chicago fell apart. "Let me make sure I understand," Keisha said, spreading documents across the table. "You're telling me that Dr. Richard Everly, the same doctor Megan reported for malpractice, is now on the board of the hospital where she's currently a patient, and that the hospital administrator, who just tried to bribe her into signing a false statement, is Everly's former colleague from Chicago? That's what I'm telling you. And you have evidence of this?" Victor slid a folder across the table. Phone records, email correspondence, board meeting minutes showing Everly advocated for Morrison's hiring. And he paused. Financial transfers between a shell company linked to Everly and the law firm that handled Megan's license suspension. Keisha's eyes widened. They paid to have her license revoked. They paid to have the investigation delayed indefinitely, kept her in limbo so she couldn't practice, couldn't sue, couldn't do anything but slowly drown. Dolores's hands tightened around her coffee cup. That girl worked doubles for 18 months, saved every penny, sent half her tips home to her mama. And these people, these doctors and lawyers in their fancy suits, they did this to her because she told the truth. They did it because the truth threatened them, Victor said. Everly's error could have killed a patient. If Megan's report had been taken seriously, he would have lost his license, maybe faced criminal charges. Instead, he's on hospital boards, collecting consulting fees, living his life like nothing happened. And Megan's carrying plates and counting pennies for insulin. Keisha flipped through the documents. Her legal mind was already assembling the case. Statute of limitations, evidentiary standards, which jurisdiction would be most favorable. "This is enough to reopen her licensing investigation," she said slowly. "Maybe enough to bring civil charges against Everly and Chicago General. But it's not enough to guarantee a win. Everly has resources, connections. He'll fight this with everything he has." "So will I," Victor said. Henry Beaumont, who'd been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Son, I've been running this cafe for 43 years. I've seen a lot of people come through those doors, some good, some bad, most just trying to survive. But I've never seen anyone like Megan. That girl doesn't have a dishonest bone in her body. Whatever you're planning, you can count me in." Dolores nodded. "Me too. That child deserves someone fighting for her for once." Victor looked at the unlikely alliance he'd assembled. An elderly cafe owner, a retired waitress, a determined lawyer, and a billionaire who'd spent 5 years forgetting how to feel anything. It wasn't an army, but it was a start. "There's one more thing," Keisha said, pulling a final document from her briefcase. "I've been investigating Megan's case since it happened, pro bono, off the record. Last month, I finally got a whistleblower at Chicago General to talk. And the patient Megan saved, the 63-year-old woman who almost died from Everly's medication error. Keisha looked directly at Victor. Her name was Patricia Ashford. The room went silent. Victor's face drained of color. That's not possible. It's documented. Patricia Ashford, admitted for cardiac surgery, nearly killed by an incorrect medication dosage. The nurse who caught the error and saved her life was Megan Holloway. Patricia Ashford is my mother. I know. Victor's hands pressed flat against the table. The same steadying gesture Megan had noticed in the cafe. His mother had been sick 5 years ago. Cardiac surgery. He'd been so consumed with Emma's death that he'd barely tracked the details. She'd recovered. That's all he'd known. That's all he'd let himself know. Megan saved my mother's life, he said slowly. And then she lost everything because of it. Keisha nodded. The bracelet she wears, the medical alert bracelet, your mother gave it to her on discharge day. Said she wanted Megan to remember what she was worth. Victor closed his eyes. The universe was smaller than he'd imagined. The threads connecting people, invisible, inevitable, pulled tighter than anyone could see. We're not just fighting for Megan anymore, he said. We're fighting for everyone Everly has hurt, everyone the system has failed, and we're going to win. Victor's plan is in motion. He's got the evidence, the allies, and the resources to take down a corrupt doctor who's been destroying lives for years. But Everly has connections everywhere, including inside the hospital where Megan is still a patient. Before the confrontation, I need to know, do you think Victor should expose Everly publicly or work through the legal system? Your answer might shape how you see what happens next. The boardroom on the 7th floor of Savannah Memorial Hospital smelled like leather chairs and old money. 12 members of the hospital's governing board sat around a mahogany table that cost more than most nurses made in a year, reviewing quarterly reports and sipping coffee from china cups that had never seen a dishwasher. Dr. Richard Everly sat at the head of the table, silver hair immaculate, reputation polished to a shine that hid every crack. He was discussing the unfortunate situation regarding a former patient, a waitress who'd been shot, whose medical bills had become a public relations concern. The simple solution, Everly was saying, is to offer settlement. Clear her debt in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. She's a nobody, a failed nurse working in a diner. She'll take the money and disappear. Gerald Morrison nodded eagerly. I've already made the initial approach. She refused, but with the right pressure, the boardroom doors exploded open. Victor Ashford walked in like he owned the building, which as of 72 hours ago he technically did. A 51% stake in Savannah Memorial's parent company, acquired through a shell corporation that had taken his lawyers 3 sleepless nights to construct. Behind him, Keisha Williams' briefcase in hand. Dolores Jenkins, chin raised in defiance. Henry Beaumont, wearing the same apron he'd worn for 43 years. And Megan Holloway, arms still in a sling, medical alert bracelet catching the fluorescent light. This is a private meeting, Everly sputtered, rising from his chair. Security. Sit down, Richard. Victor's voice was quiet, lethal. Security works for me now. So does this hospital. So does everyone in this room except the people I brought with me. The board members exchanged panic glances. Several reached for phones. None of them dialed. Victor walked to the head of the table, standing directly across from Everly. The two men stared at each other. Old money versus new. Inherited cruelty versus earned ruthlessness. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, Victor said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. I'm here to discuss a conspiracy, one that began 6 years ago in Chicago and followed an innocent woman all the way to Savannah, one that involves the man sitting at the head of your table. Keisha stepped forward, opening her briefcase. Documents fanned across the mahogany table like accusations. Dr. Richard Everly, she said, 6 years ago, you prescribed an incorrect medication dosage to a 63-year-old cardiac patient at Chicago General Hospital. The error would have been fatal. A trauma nurse named Megan Holloway caught your mistake and saved the patient's life. Everly's face went pale. That's ancient history. The investigation cleared. The investigation was sabotaged. Keisha's voice cut like a scalpel. These documents show wire transfers from a shell company linked to your personal accounts to the law firm that handled Ms. Holloway's licensing review. You paid to have her license suspended. You paid to have her career destroyed. And when she moved to Savannah to start over, you followed her, joining this hospital's board 18 months ago, 6 months after she started working at Rosewood Café. Murmurs rippled through the board. Several members pushed back from the table, physically distancing themselves from Everly. "This is slander," Everly hissed. "I'll sue you into oblivion." "You'll try." Victor pulled a folder from his jacket. "But first, let me tell you about the patient whose life Megan saved. The one whose near death you try to cover up." Victor's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Inside, a photograph of his mother, and beside it, paperwork bearing the seal of the Emma Ashford Foundation for Victims of Gun Violence. 5 years ago, my daughter Emma was killed in a mass shooting. She was 23. She called me while she was dying, and I didn't answer the phone. His voice cracked but held. I've spent every day since then trying to figure out how to live with that failure, how to honor her memory when I couldn't even honor her final moments. He held up the foundation documents. "This is the Emma Ashford Foundation. I established it 4 years ago, but never had the courage to make it public. It provides scholarships and support services for families affected by gun violence. As of yesterday, it's fully funded with $47 million in initial capital." The board members stared. Even Everly had gone silent. "I'm telling you this," Victor continued, "because I want you to understand who I am and why I'm here. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to destroy careers or ruin lives. I'm here because a woman named Megan Holloway did something I couldn't do. She moved toward danger instead of away from it. She took a bullet for a stranger's child, and she deserves to have her life back." Megan stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. "There's something none of us knew until 3 days ago," she said. "The patient I saved in Chicago. The woman whose life Dr. Everly almost ended. Her name was Patricia Ashford." Victor's breath caught. Even now, hearing it spoken aloud, the coincidence felt impossible. "She gave me this bracelet when she was discharged," Megan continued, lifting her wrist. The silver band caught the light, the engraved name visible to everyone in the room. "She told me to never forget what I was worth. I've worn it every day for 6 years. I didn't know she was Victor's mother. I didn't know any of this was connected." She looked at Victor. "I saved your mother's life, and you saved mine. Neither of us knew. Neither of us planned it. But here we are." Victor Ashford, Billionaire CEO, the man who hadn't cried in public since his daughter's funeral, broke. The tears came silently at first, then harder, his shoulders shaking with the weight of 5 years of grief and guilt, and the impossible grace of discovering that the stranger he'd tried to save had already saved someone he loved. "My mother never told me the details," he managed. "She said a nurse caught an error. She said she was lucky. I was so consumed with Emma's death. I never asked more. I never knew." Megan crossed the room. She stood before him, this broken billionaire, this hollow man who'd been running from his own shadow for half a decade. And she did something no one expected. She took his hand. "You answered the phone this time," she said softly. "When that little girl screamed, when the gun went off, when everyone else froze, you moved. You didn't hesitate. That's who you are now. That's who Emma would want you to be." The boardroom was silent. 12 executives, a disgraced doctor, and a room full of witnesses watched a waitress comfort a billionaire, and not one of them could look away. Everly tried to slip toward the door. 2 security guards, Victor's security guards, blocked his path. Dr. Everly, Keisha said, her voice carrying the weight of 6 years of injustice. You're not going anywhere. The Georgia Medical Board will be receiving these documents within the hour. The FBI is already investigating the wire transfers. And Ms. Holloway's nursing license? It's being reinstated effective immediately, per an emergency order I obtained this morning. Everly's face crumpled. The mask finally fell. And underneath it was exactly what Megan had always known was there. A coward who'd built his career on the suffering of people he considered beneath him. Victor straightened, wiped his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was steel. This hospital will conduct a full internal investigation. Anyone connected to the conspiracy against Megan Holloway will be terminated and referred for prosecution. And the Emma Ashford Foundation will be establishing a permanent fund for whistleblowers in healthcare. Nurses, doctors, anyone who risks their career to protect patients. He looked at Megan, starting with her. The story broke like a dam. Within 48 hours, every major news outlet in the country was running some version of the headline. Billionaire exposes medical conspiracy. Saves heroic waitress who saved his mother. The details were too perfect, too interconnected, too Hollywood to ignore. A corrupt doctor. A wrongfully destroyed nurse. A grieving billionaire. A bullet taken for a stranger's child. And underneath it all, a connection that neither hero had known existed. Dr. Richard Everly was removed from Savannah Memorial's board within 24 hours of the confrontation. The Georgia Medical Board launched an emergency review of his license. The same process he'd weaponized against Megan, now turned against him. By the end of the week, 3 other hospitals had quietly severed ties with him, and the FBI had opened a formal investigation into the wire transfers. Megan's nursing license was reinstated on a Thursday morning. She received the notification via email while sitting in her mother's apartment, helping administer the insulin they could finally afford. She read the message 3 times before she believed it. License status: active. Restrictions: none. Effective date: immediate. 6 years. 6 years of exile, of carrying plates, of watching her skills atrophy while she counted pennies for medications. And now, with a single email, she was a nurse again. Victor's public statement went viral within hours of its release. He'd written it himself, refusing input from his PR team, insisting that the words be his own. 5 years ago, I failed to answer my daughter's final phone call. I was on a business call. I thought I had time. I was wrong. 3 weeks ago, I watched a waitress throw herself in front of a bullet to save a stranger's child. She didn't calculate the cost. She didn't hesitate. She just moved. A waitress did what I couldn't do. She answered the call. Her name is Megan Holloway, and she is the bravest person I have ever met. She saved my mother's life 6 years ago and lost everything for telling the truth. Last month, she almost lost her own life protecting a child she'd never met. She deserves more than money. She deserves justice. This is me answering the call. Finally, the video of Victor reading this statement, tears streaming down his face, voice breaking on his daughter's name, was viewed 14 million times in its first week. Comment sections overflowed with stories from other nurses who'd been punished for speaking up, other whistleblowers who'd lost everything for doing the right thing. The hashtag answer the call trended for 3 days. At Rosewood Café, Dolores Jenkins sat at the counter and wept. She'd worked with Megan for 18 months, had watched her carry plates and smile at customers, and never once complain about the life that had been stolen from her. Had known she was special, but hadn't known why until now. That girl, Dolores said to anyone who would listen, that girl is what this world should be. And those people tried to destroy her for it. The young mother from Booth 7, her name was Sarah Chun, and her daughter was named Lily, gave her first interview to a local news station. She sat on camera with Lily in her lap. The same gap-toothed smile that had reminded Victor of Emma and spoke through tears. I froze. When that man pointed the gun at my baby, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then this woman, this stranger, she just appeared. She pushed us down and covered us with her body. I felt the impact when the bullet hit her. I felt her blood on my hands. Sarah's voice broke. She didn't know us. She didn't owe us anything, but she was willing to die for my daughter. How do you thank someone for that? How do you ever repay that kind of love? The interview aired on a Tuesday evening. By Wednesday morning, a GoFundMe page that Megan hadn't known existed had raised $340,000 from strangers across the country. She donated every penny to the Emma Ashford Foundation. 3 weeks later, the apartment looked different now. Not because Megan had bought new furniture. She hadn't. But because the weight was gone. The stack of overdue bills that had lived on her kitchen counter for 18 months had been replaced by a vase of flowers from Dolores. The eviction notice on her refrigerator had been replaced by her reinstated nursing license, framed in simple black wood. Her mother's insulin was delivered automatically now, paid for by insurance that Megan could finally afford. The constant calculation, $8.47 divided by tips divided by shifts divided by prayers, had stopped running in the background of her mind like a fever that wouldn't break. She could breathe. For the first time in 6 years, she could actually breathe. But the scars remained. She still flinched at loud noises, still positioned herself near exits in crowded rooms, still woke at 3 a.m. with her heart pounding, certain she could smell gunpowder mixed with peach cobbler. The therapist Victor had quietly arranged, and that Megan had reluctantly accepted, said this was normal, said healing wasn't linear, said some wounds close slowly and others never close at all. The job offer had arrived by courier, hand-delivered in an envelope bearing the Emma Ashford Foundation letterhead. Director of Victim Services. Salary, $175,000. Benefits, full. Start date, whenever you're ready. Megan had read it 12 times, had called Keisha to make sure it was real, had cried in her bathroom where no one could see, then washed her face and called Victor to accept. You don't have to do this, she'd said. I can go back to nursing. I can. You can do both, Victor had interrupted. The foundation needs someone who understands trauma from the inside, someone who's lived it, someone who moves toward the fire. Their relationship defied easy categorization, not romance. Neither of them was ready for that, and maybe neither of them ever would be. Not friendship exactly, though they talked twice a week, and he'd started coming to Rosewood Cafe again, actually eating his shrimp and grits this time. Something else. Something forged in blood and bullets and the impossible mathematics of two people whose lives had been tangled together long before they'd ever met. Victor was still grieving, still listening to Emma's voicemail some nights, still visiting her grave every Sunday. But something had shifted in him, a door opening where a wall had been. He smiled occasionally now, laughed once at something Dolores said, and looked so surprised by the sound that Megan had pretended not to notice. She wasn't his redemption. She made that clear, but maybe she was his reminder that redemption was possible. And maybe that was enough. Victor called her on a Sunday evening, 3 months after the shooting. There's something I need to show you, he said. His voice was strange, thick with something she couldn't identify. Can you come to my house? She found him in a study, surrounded by boxes she'd never seen before. Emma's things, she realized. Photographs, journals, the accumulated artifacts of a life cut short. He'd finally opened them. I found something, he said, in Emma's journal, from 6 years ago, right after my mother's surgery. He handed her the notebook, opened to a page dated 3 weeks before Emma died. Megan read the entry, her hands trembling. Dad's been so distracted with work that he doesn't even know Grandma almost died. But I went to visit her today, and she told me everything. There was a nurse, Megan, I think, who caught a doctor's mistake and saved her life. Grandma says she was an angel. She gave her a bracelet and made her promise to remember her worth. I want to be like that someday. Someone who sees what's wrong and fixes it, even when it's hard, even when it costs something. Grandma says that's what real courage looks like. Megan couldn't breathe. Emma knew about you, Victor said softly. She admired you. She wanted to be like you, someone who moved toward the fire. His voice broke. Her last voicemail? The one I didn't answer? She called to tell me about Grandma's nurse. About you. She wanted me to know that people like you existed. The journal trembled in Megan's hands. 6 years. 6 years of invisible threads, connecting them across time and tragedy and impossible coincidence. Some connections aren't coincidence, Victor said. They're unfinished business. The Emma Ashford Foundation's first scholarship ceremony was held on a Saturday in April, in a conference room filled with sunlight and second chances. Megan stood at the podium, medical alert bracelet catching the light, and welcomed the first recipient, a 19-year-old girl whose mother had been killed in a mass shooting, who'd worked 2 jobs to afford community college, who dreamed of becoming a nurse. In the front row, Victor watched with tears he no longer tried to hide. Beside him, Dolores Henry, Sarah Chun with little Lily in her lap, a family built from wreckage, held together by grace. Megan looked out at the room, at the faces of people who'd been broken and were learning to rebuild, and she realized something. She was no longer positioned near the door. She stood at the center of the room, exactly where she belonged. Megan's journey from invisible to unstoppable took 18 months. But here's the truth about stories like hers. They're not rare. They're just invisible until someone tells them. If you're still here, if this story moved you, hit subscribe right now. Join the community of people who believe invisible people deserve to be seen. Drop a comment telling me your hidden skill, the thing nobody would guess just by looking at you.